Today is Palm Sunday. Historically, today is the day that Jesus returned to Jerusalem. The crowds greeted him by waving palm branches and covering his path. The use of palm branches was common among ancient Greeks, Romans, and Hebrews. The Romans waved them to welcome royalty. I have no palm branches, but I celebrate your presence here this morning and welcome you as royalty nonetheless. Today marks the beginning of the Christian Holy Week, the beginning of Jesus' journey. We all have our own journeys. We encounter darkness and difficulties along the way, and yet we know there is light and hope. I light this chalice for each of you, wherever you are on your journey. Blessed is the path on which you travel. Blessed is the body that carries you upon it. Blessed is your heart that has heard the call. Blessed is your mind that discerns the way. Blessed is the gift that you will receive by going. Truly blessed is the gift that you will become on the journey.
Just as a community gathered around Jesus for mutual support along the way, so too is High Plains Church Unitarian Universalist a gathered community in which we provide each other with mutual support. As part of that support, we take time in our service each week to lift up the joys and sorrows of the gathered community. If you have a joy or sorrow you would like read aloud on a Sunday, please email the information to Reverend Dana or to Karen Wilsey, the High Plains Church Office Administrator. You can also write your joy or sorrow in the Joys and Sorrows book before the service begins. This book is kept on the candles table during the week. We have one notation in the book today. We hold Robin Laborde's family in our hearts. Her husband, Robert, has been in the hospital with pneumonia and complications this past week. I would also like to add a personal sorrow. Sometime in the last few days, our house's mailbox was vandalized and violently destroyed, and so we are addressing that in all the follow-up ways needed. We're not yet aware of whether there was identity theft or if it was a hate crime or what, but we're hoping it will all resolve successfully. As I offer the below prayer, please feel free to come forward and light a candle in silence. And Annabel, please light one candle for the prayer for sorrows and one for the celebration of joys. Spirit of life and love, we lift up those today who are suffering from pain, whether physical or emotional, whose hearts are broken, whose spirits are stifled, who live with any of the many thousand sorrows of our world. We send all in difficulty or struggle our care, compassion, and love. And Spirit of life and love, we join with those who today are celebrating blessings, small and large, whose lives overflow with happiness, who are experiencing any of the many thousand joys of our world. May their delight remain, and may they be blessings for those around them. We'll take a moment in silence as those who care to come up light their candles. And Annabel, please light 2 more candles for all the joys and sorrows that remain in our hearts. I bet I know what some of you are thinking right now. And you may be right, I may be crazy. But sometimes it's helpful in our search for truth and meaning to try crazy things. And setting Billy Joel beside Jesus is pretty crazy, don't you think? I have it on fairly good authority that Billy Joel is not a terribly nice guy. And as he himself admits in his song River of Dreams, I'm not sure about a life after this. God knows I've never been a spiritual man. So why use Billy Joel's music to help us reflect on the life and work of Jesus? Any spiritual truth worth its salt should crop up in all sorts of places. From the Buddha meditating under the Bodhi tree, you see, Dana, I did get the Buddha in today, to women marching for gender justice in the streets. And if Jesus gives us access to some spiritual truths, why not see whether and to what extent we find them in Billy Joel's music as well? So here's how we'll proceed. For each of today's 5 Billy Joel songs, we'll extract a word or a phrase, consider what that word or phrase has to do with the life and work of Jesus, see how the idea is framed in the song, and then ask what any of this has to do with us in particular. As we proceed, keep in mind that this month's theme is promise. I think we'll find that the words and phrases we lift up are filled with promise, particularly promise for our own lives and growth. Before we jump into the songs, though, there are 2 quick matters to deal with. First, even Mark, the earliest gospel, was written more than 30 years after Jesus' death. The Gospels, which I will use today to provide examples of what Jesus did and why people still care about it, are theological affirmations, not eyewitness journalistic accounts. And while I'll be describing gospel moments as though they actually happened, there's a bit of a leap of faith involved in doing so. Nonetheless, I think it's a worthwhile exercise. Something may be spiritually useful whether or not it's empirically truthful. Try saying that 10 times. Second, it may seem strange to treat Billy Joel's songs as religious, but his songs are about relationships as surely as religious songs are about relationships. Most of the time, we know whether a love song is intended for the singer's earthly beloved or for the singer's God. But there's always a little room for slippage, or contemporary Christian music could never have crossed over into the popular music scene. For example, when CCM artist Susan Ashton sings "You Move Me," the wise listener knows she's singing about Jesus. When I heard the song play in a Boston area restaurant on a pop station, she sounded like she was singing about her boyfriend. And it's true that when Billy Joel writes about love, he means romantic love, or love of a friend, or even just love of the people around him. In contrast, the Gospels are quite clear that Jesus' main love affair is with God. But perhaps, just for today, we might draw a bit less of a line between the different types of love and see how they can inform each other. So that's the intent of the day. And if none of this works for you, if it's too crazy, at least you'll walk out of here with Billy Joel tunes in your head. That's not a bad goal for a Sunday. We begin today with the promise and experience of belonging as we find these in Billy Joel's song, "You're My Home." True, Jesus did reportedly say that foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. But how would Billy Joel translate that? How about this? Home can be the Pennsylvania Turnpike, Indiana's early morning dew. High up in the hills of California, home is just another word for you. And it does seem that for Jesus, home was just another word for God. The crazy things Jesus reportedly did and said make no sense without the context of his absolute and utter trust in God to care for human beings, feed and clothe us, and respond with abundant generosity the moment we ask, search, or knock. The point here is not whether that's our experience of the divine. The point is that it seems to have been Jesus' experience, and it fueled his life, his work, and his death. Billy Joel sings, "If I travel all my life and I never get to stop and settle down, long as I have you by my side, there's a roof above and good walls all around." And indeed, Jesus' ministry was clearly itinerant, whether to reach more people or to keep from getting caught by the Romans until he felt his time had come. But despite the lack of a fixed abode, Jesus seems to have been at home in God pretty much the whole time. So what wisdom did Jesus or Billy Joel or both have to offer us here? I would say both of them in their different ways invite us to ask some questions. Who or what is our home? To whom or what do we belong? When and where do we most deeply and fully experience belonging? And of course, keeping this month's theme in mind, what is the promise of belonging for us? Once we belong, what then? It seems to me that once we have a deep enough sense of belonging, we are able to offer hospitality, which in its most radical form means welcoming everyone without reservation or requirements, or as Billy Joel sings, just the way you are. Some of you may be familiar with the phrase, God loves you just the way you are, and he loves you too much to let you stay that way. That wasn't supposed to be funny. No, I can't speak for you, but that slogan has always bothered me, not least because of its presumption that God is exclusively male. But what if we tweaked it a bit? What if radical hospitality is about meeting people where they are, without judgment, and inviting them to become their best selves by working on becoming our best selves? Jesus appears to have offered hospitality in the form of healing and an open table to everyone from Roman centurions, the oppressors of his people, to the despised tax collectors who collaborated with the Romans in oppressing the Jews, to prostitutes, about whom the Hebrew Bible has the occasional harsh word. Yes, we're aware of his supposed invitation to the woman caught in adultery to go and sin no more. But mostly when people engaged in questionable practices meet Jesus, they volunteer to give up the questionable practices because they are so inspired by him. We can be similar inspirations for ourselves and each other. Like Billy Joel, like the God of Jesus, we can learn to live out this great prayer. I said I love you, and that's forever. And this I promise from the heart.
I have a jacket.
I couldn't love you any better. I love you just the way you are.
I'll make it outside.
We can offer this prayer to ourselves, to our loved ones, to each other. We can become a people of hospitality, learning how to be welcomed and how to offer welcome freely to others. As we do this, I imagine we'll begin to understand the many promises that hospitality offers us. Promises of joy and gratitude and open-heartedness. Promises of rich lives filled with blessings. A deep sense of belonging and the experience of offering and experiencing hospitality can lead to a robust practice of ministry, walking alongside people in their lives of pain and beauty. We think of Jesus' entire life and work as a ministry, but we can also think of Billy Joel's 6 months at the now defunct Executive Room Bar in Los Angeles in 1972 as a kind of ministry to those in need of a healer or at least a good musician. The song Piano Man is based on the true stories of a guy singing and playing in the city of angels on the shores not of Galilee, but of the Pacific Ocean. And how far a cry is it really from the fishermen casting their nets to Davy, who's still in the Navy and probably will be for life? Jesus heals people from their damaged social status, and he eats with anyone who will join him. Billy Joel helps people who are in the mood for a melody to feel all right. And he sits with them as they pour out their woes, as when John at the bar says his work is killing him. We're used to thinking of ministry as what Jesus did. But what if there are many forms of ministry? We can ask questions such as these. What kind of ministry do we each receive here at High Plains? What about elsewhere? What are the promises of the ministry we experience? What kind of ministry can we offer to others? What can we promise them with our ministries? In what ways are our commitments to minister to others a promise to ourselves as well as to them? Once we are not afraid of the word ministry as a way of being that's available to all of us, the possibilities of how we might live in the world multiply 1,000-fold. But while it is all well and good to talk about the positive aspects of Jesus' ministry or Billy Joel's ministry or our potential ministries, this is Palm Sunday, and the Jesus story eventually turns hard and troubling. Something causes this charismatic healer, teacher, and prophet to get picked up by the Romans and summarily killed for political activism. What was it? I invite us to consider two aspects of Jesus' Jerusalem Week activities in light of Billy Joel's song, Honesty. First, Jesus' supposing ranting about the scribes and Pharisees, and second, his supposed actions at the temple. The word I'd like to propose to characterize Billy Joel's song and Jesus' last week is actually not honesty, but integrity, which includes both truth-telling and righteous living. Billy Joel needed honesty from the one person, perhaps a lover, who he thought could and should provide it. Jesus needed integrity from those whose religious place it was to live it, teach it, and model it for others. Integrity during Jesus' last week seems to have had a lot to do with proper treatment of the poor. Jesus condemns the scribes and Pharisees for laying heavy burdens on the poor without being willing to do anything themselves to help the poor with their burdens. Whether we call this hypocrisy or not, and whether it really all went down this way or not, Jesus' concern here does seem to point to a lack of integrity on the part of religious leaders that could lead to the poor becoming alienated from God. And I suspect many of us can identify with this kind of alienation, as UU churches are filled with people who left their childhood religions or were driven out of them due to a perceived lack of integrity on the part of leaders. But the most important action that got Jesus killed is almost certainly overthrowing tables and driving moneylenders out of the temple. So we need to spend a bit of time on this. Here's the material from Mark. And he entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching and saying, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations,' but you have made it a den of robbers." There are two issues here. First, calling the temple a house of prayer for all the nations meant Gentiles were invited to worship there as well. But over time, the court of the Gentiles had been turned into a marketplace, meaning that Gentiles could no longer worship at the temple. Given Jesus' religious priorities, this would have been a sure failure of integrity. Second, the tax and animal sacrificial system supported by the temple marketplace were particularly burdensome for the poor. And we know that Jesus strongly supported the well-being of the poor. Developing a financial system to keep the temple going would have been morally problematic for Jesus if it interfered with the poor worshiping fully and freely. So the Occupy the Temple action, as I sometimes call it, okay, I can wait, seems to have been about protesting the limitation of some people to worship the God of their understanding in the way they had been taught to. This may not sound like what we usually mean by integrity, but if we define integrity, as I suggested above, as righteous living, then anything that interferes with our ability to live morally upright lives, as we understand the term, is a problem. And when it is other people and their social systems and religious beliefs that cause the interfering, we might well be filled with the same desire to cleanse the temple that Jesus apparently felt, and felt so strongly he was willing to die for it. So then, what about us? What does it mean for us to live lives of integrity and to support others in their living lives of integrity? Billy Joel needed honesty from someone in particular because he found it in so few places. Where do we find the integrity we need, the integrity from others that helps us live with integrity? How can we support others in their search for integrity, wholeness, a righteous life? What does that look like right here at church? What is the promise of a life infused with integrity and a life that offers integrity to others? And finally, we come to vulnerability, the spiritual point we reach when we have been blessed with a sense of belonging, have encountered and shared hospitality, have offered and received ministry, and have prioritized a life of integrity. For Billy Joel, vulnerability surfaces in the song "And So It Goes," with its resignation, pre-broken heart, and openness to the will of the other. Today, fortunately sung with great vulnerability by Jody Vegas. In the Gospels, we see this kind of vulnerability particularly clearly in the story of Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane just before his arrest. Now, if we're honest, we have to acknowledge that what probably really happened was that the Romans picked Jesus up right after the Occupy the Temple action and simply crucified him. No involvement of the Jewish leaders, no trial, no nothing. So the story of Jesus praying in Gethsemane almost certainly didn't happen as we read it in the Gospels. Nonetheless, even if the story of Gethsemane is a later invention of the church, it is one plausible type of theological conclusion to the love story begun with Jesus' sense of home in God. In the Gospel of Mark, we notice that Jesus prays to God in Gethsemane, not as Father with a capital F, but as Abba, or what we would translate as Daddy. Jesus asks his daddy to take him off the path that leads to a sure encounter with death, but then says, "Yet not what I want, but what you want." Or, as Billy Joel might say, "But you can make decisions too, and you can have this heart to break." Jesus concludes, "Your will be done." Billy Joel concludes, "And so it goes." These two very different but profoundly sad moments invite us to ask, where might we be vulnerable in our own lives? To whom are we willing to give our hearts, even if our hearts might get broken? Part of vulnerability is acceptance of reality beyond our control. What difficult things in our lives are we called to accept, even when, and especially when, they hurt like hell? What promises does a life of vulnerability offer us? Billy Joel and Jesus. Jesus and Billy Joel. An odd couple indeed. Yet if we are willing to strive for a sense of belonging in our lives and offer that sense to others, if we are willing to receive hospitality and grant it to others, if we are willing to be ministers and receive ministry from others, if we are willing to aim for lives of integrity and invite others to such lives, and if we are willing to open ourselves to vulnerability and welcome it in others, we could do worse than to study the life of Jesus and the songs of Billy Joel. Many promises lie before us. May we live into them with joy, gratitude, and love. Amen, and blessed be. As we go out from this place today, may our lives be filled with belonging, both the experiencing of it and the offering of it. May our lives be filled with hospitality, both in the welcome we receive and the welcome we give to others. May our lives be filled with ministry as we walk with others and share their joys and sorrows, even as they walk with us and share ours. May our lives be filled with integrity as we both seek and speak the truth in love. And may our lives be filled with vulnerability as we open our hearts to others and they to us, that we and they might live in abundance. Amen, and blessed be. And now please join me in reciting our closing affirmation.
Nurtured by this